I'm Asadullah from Pakistan. You might have heard a few days back, Holy Quran was burned in Sweden. So, and recently you might know that the UN approves the motion against the religious hatred, but unfortunately the US voted against this motion, as US is considered the pinnacle of religious freedom and champion of democracy, but the US voted against this motion. So my question is, why the religious leader cannot come up with a collective notion and narrative against the religious hatred? And also, if you kindly add, how do you see Islamophobia as a problem in Western cultures?
Well, this is a big question. If I may start, obviously, throughout the years now, we have seen incidents happening from drawing the cartoons about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, burning the Quran not only once but multiple times. And we have, the reaction that we have seen, especially from the Western nations, is truly what we call hypocrisy. Truly. In the same time, we claim to promote religious freedom, freedom of speech. But in the same time, we have failed to protect the sacredness of some of these faith traditions. And we have allowed people to just tamper with the sacredness of different communities, which created a very, very hostile environment between different faith-based communities. I would say, I'm from Algeria, so I'm very familiar with what's going on in France. And France have been, they have proven, over and over again that it's the most hypocritical country in the world. Especially when they claim to be the country of égalité, fraternité, the slogans of the French Revolution. But when we look at the ground, what's going on over there, it's horrible. It is horrible. Where a Muslim woman wearing hijab cannot have access to the school where her kids are. She cannot have access to the school just because of the piece of fabric that she is wearing on her head, observing her Islamic duty. So what we have seen, unfortunately, and I've seen the vote at the UN in regards to at least blaming, what happened in Sweden, and it just happened in Germany actually. Yeah. I think yesterday, somebody burned the Quran and threw it in front of one of the mosques over there. So it's a very unfortunate situation, and my hope and prayer always is for people really to understand how to be respectful to one another, how to be sensitive to one another. We're not supposed to do to others what we don't want people to do to us. This is very important. Actually, if we go back to the Quran, Almighty God prohibited Muslims when they were in Mecca to insult the idols. Why? Because if you do this, then expect them to insult your own God and your own. So showing respect to one another. Even you disagree as much as you want, but disagreement can go with showing respect to what your Muslim neighbor, what your Jewish neighbor, what your Christian neighbor, your Buddhist, your Hindu neighbor considers as something sacred and holy. I think this is something that as human beings we should really consider. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to address that question?
So in Buddhism, we have what we identify as three poisons, and those are anger, greed, and ignorance. And unfortunately, I think that if you trace back some of what's happening, it is driven by fear, driven by one of these three poisons. Some of it is anger at being not heard. Some of it is greed.
Yeah.
Why is this person taking what I have? There's that fear. And the other is ignorance. It's ignorance and not seeing that we are all interdependent, we are all connected, and therefore not having the knowledge to be respectful of someone else's differences.
Talk about Islamophobia.
Yeah, actually, I forgot to mention. Let me just say something very brief about Islamophobia. It's a big topic, but Islamophobia in the West in general, in the United States in particular, is not an isolated action done by few people here and there. Islamophobia in North America is a very well organized campaign to spread fear about anything related to Islam and Muslims. CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, a few years ago, published a very, important report about the Islamophobia industry in the United States. Okay, talking about organizations, about individuals whose business is only to spread fear about Islam and Muslims, and this is what some of the media outlets and some of the politicians have been doing, especially scapegoating Muslims and blaming everything going wrong in the United States to Muslims, and also scoring some cheap political points, especially when they are running for offices. This is what Islamophobia is, unfortunately.
I would just, thank you. I would just give some voice to a very broad sense of freedoms. And as opposed to the way, there's a difference between how one should behave and how one is permitted to behave. Right? One should be polite, but there are no laws against being rude. And they are in my house, but then the greatest consequence is I ask you to leave my house if you're just impolite. So in the language of greatest freedoms, there are lots of things that people choose to do that they shouldn't do, that are very offensive, but should not be criminalized. And I think the struggle with that in free society is a very serious and complicated issue. I would also add, in terms of the broad question of Islamophobia, or broaden it to religious hatred, is, and I would distinguish here from the ignorant falafel comment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of intolerant comments that are based on ignorance, and that needs to be fought against through education and through caring. Right? Those aren't bad people. They're just, some flavor of clueless. And you can cure ignorance. It just takes education. But in terms of hatred, very few people are single issue haters. So, there is this nexus of I hate you and I hate you and I hate you and I hate you, right? And so one finds that a whole lot of people who express Islamophobia also express, broadly anti-immigrant issues and anti-Semitic issues and racist. And so the challenge, I think, is about all people of goodwill standing up and together against those who would spread vile, who would speak otherwise. And even amongst people who don't agree on all issues, we all can agree that there's no place in this world anymore for any kind of baseless hatred.
Yeah.
And part of it is when an act of hate happens, whether it's directed at your church or your temple or my synagogue or your mosque, I don't even know the right word. We all need to stand together and say there's no place for that.
Abby?